which has done a major sector reform, of which, by the way, us as Tetra Tech, and that was the team leader under the USAID MLED project, we participated, and this was a request by Energy Minister of Mexico to help them in the first auction, the design of the first auction. Guess what? Even today, we have helped right now we're in the fourth auction, and right now we're doing a study associated with also the private industry. Just met a couple of weeks ago with the Wind Power Association, the Solar Power Association, the Hydropower Association of Mexico, with the investors, and we're going to be presenting this to the President of the Regulatory Board of the Regulatory Commission of Mexico, even that we get these very low prices, but you know what? They're not sustainable. And why? Because there's all kinds of issues, you know, as you look at energy auction. And guess what? A lot of these issues, you need to go on the policy and the regulatory above. How are the auctions laid out in Mexico, for example, which we also participated? First, you have the manual of the auctions. What does it need to include? That's a process that goes through public consultation. In Mexico, it's called the COFEMER, of which it's usually the sector, the private sector, are allowed 90 days to provide comments. And these comments, by the way, are shared public, and you can see them on the internet. And then to see, when we designed the current fourth auction that is ongoing right now in Mexico, and actually I heard some potential bidders are here also participating in that fourth auction, some of these issues that we've identified, we didn't have time to go back to the manual. So then, because we didn't have those 90 days and going through the public consultation process, but that's why we're doing that current study in terms, and some of these issues are going to address legal regulatory. What are they? For example, intermittency, the grid code needs to be always reviewed. What else needs to be reviewed? Transmission. You had mentioned, for example, somebody here, transmission. Well, we're doing this stuff in Latin America. What did we do in Mexico under our current project is actually, if you look at the electricity law of Mexico, although CFE has still its assets in terms of transmission, but the law allows private transmission. So what did we do? The first was a legal analysis on this other option where in Mexico you could have a private transmission line. So we worked on the whole legal analysis with the ISO, SENACE, CENER, the Energy Ministry, and CRE, the regulatory agency, to get an agreement among all the lawyers about our interpretation of this electricity law of Mexico. With that, we found the options legally, designed the PPA, and guess what? Right now, ongoing is the bidding process for the very first private transmission line in Mexico. It's $1.3 billion of private investments, and of which I know already there's 18 interested bidders from the United States, from Europe, from Latin America, and other countries. So a lot of this stuff which is mentioned here and sometimes mentioned in other countries, take a look at what is happening. I've seen also some of the data being presented, and I shared some of this to some, including some publications you're getting here. Guess what? 2016 is outdated. Right now, what you see in a lot of this data is completely different. What is happening. Chile, I'm quite involved also with Chile. What was the big change in Chile in terms of the energy auctions? Well, guess what? Transmission was a key element. How did we get the solar? If we did not connect central Chile with northern Chile, and we had to change the electricity law of Chile to get the power, solar power from Atacama. To get into the line. But the issue is still not resolved there. The auction was very interesting in Chile, is where we established 4-hour periods. So in terms, there's not a capacity market. It's met based on the renewable energy to meet that power within that 4-hour period. So anyway, to be kind of, very briefly, what I'm saying here is you need to address all. You need to address the market, and based on that, you go up on the policy, the regulatory, and provide that enabling environment to get those competitive prices that we're seeing. And even in Mexico, we're moving forward in terms of the evolution of these auctions, and basically to address issues, the renewable energy zones with NREL. They've done some great work also in Mexico. We have been involved. We're integrating that also now with a new transmission line that we just did in Sonora. There's issue about regional auctions. National auctions are very different than regional auctions. We're looking at that option Because again, we see there's a huge solar potential in the northern part of Mexico, and when we go through the whole country perspective for a big country, you need to take a look at the regional perspective. So for investors, developers, equipment providers, there's a huge market worldwide, and I would say in Latin America, where I've been working a lot, it's a whole revolution, and it's a huge opportunity right now.
Great, thank you for that. So I'd like to turn the conversation a bit more towards, so understanding that there's a process in which countries are changing their policies and they want to integrate renewable energy into their overall power systems. At what point do you think that there are sufficient levels of policies, auctions, and studies that enable U.S. companies to be interested in and willing to get their feet into the country?
That's a great question, and thanks for bringing the energy auction, because I've been recently a lot of demand to do in all these countries around the world design of energy auctions, and I think there's a lot of confusion. You know, basically, in an energy auction, again, there's a whole process that you need to well identify, you know, from the calendar. How long is that process going to be? The Q&A process, which I've also participated. And again, it varies from countries. In Mexico, and the Q&A, again, very sophisticated, to the one I was there like a month and a half ago. It was in Kazakhstan. We're supporting also Kazakhstan in the very first renewable energy auction. I would say it's quite a challenge. And it was quite interesting being on the investor Q&A session about some of their concerns. So yeah, definitely in terms of the auction, what we call the competitive procurement, we've identified, let's say, 13 phases that needs to be well designed in terms of the design of the auction to give that credibility of the investor, that transparency. And also we worked on what we consider technical, legal, and financial requirements for the bidders to participate. And that's what gives really that comfort level. I hear also this issue about the financial, the need for financing for renewable energy, et cetera. Well, guess what? A lot of the markets I work in Latin America, that is not an issue. The big issue we're facing is the social environmental aspects with renewable energy. If we go on the Mexico auctions, our challenges have not been on the financing. Again, we got $9 billion in 2 years of renewable energy investments. Where we have projects are being stuck, they're the ones in Yucatan, due to the environmental social, because 80% of the state of Yucatan is a preserved area. So sorry to go very broad, but all of these are linked together.
Thank you. I think we can open it up to questions if there's any. Otherwise
Yeah, questions. Okay, I've got one here, and then Victoria, and then Ethan.
Thanks. My name is Pablo Torres. I'm with Crown Agents USA and implementing partner of the USAID CEADIR project. I wanted to hear a little bit more on this concept of sustainability of the auctions. We heard earlier about contracted versus built. And I wonder what evidence you've heard of whether these prices, very low prices, which we're seeing, are going to be sustainable, whether some of these auctions that have taken place 1, 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, the projects are getting built or not. Which direction? Well, there's some evidence to the topic of sustainability and these incredibly low prices and very creative financing mechanisms.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo, for that question. In that context, yeah, and we've discussed it before, absolutely, the concerns on the prices. I remember when we got the results of the first auction in Mexico, which the average price was like around $54 per megawatt hour. To a certain extent, that was very satisfying to us that were involved in the whole design of the restructuring of the power sector there and the legal regulatory. That's competitive. But you know what was our comfort level in the first auction? Was the winning companies. Who did we get as winning companies? The biggest companies of the world. We got the Enel, we got Jinko, we got everybody. Yes, we got, so to a certain extent that gave us a comfort level. Then came auction 2, as you know, the prices went further down. This third auction, we were very concerned, $20 per megawatt hour. We got 1 and 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Is this sustainable? You know what? I talked to all the investors, the developers that want these projects. They feel fairly comfortable about it. But the reason we're doing right now this analysis for future auctions for Mexico is we don't consider that is sustainable. Maybe the greatest resource potential has been used there, but we don't consider, and guess what, in this fourth auction, we consider the prices are gonna go up due to this. I think a lot of the prices are also a reflection of the investors really wanting to be in this very interesting market. So again, if you're there first, you're gonna get a lot of knowledge of that market. So I think it's such an attractive market that a lot of companies are bidding very low prices because they feel, what, if you're in renewable energy, this is a very big market, good legal regulatory framework. I'm going to perhaps underbid, in order to be participating in that market and have further knowledge in that market, of which, by the way, a lot of these investors are learning and they're going to other countries around the world or other countries even in Latin America, building on the lessons learned there.
Can I just add on
Please.
to that point? So just to add on to what Ignacio was saying, I think that from an investor perspective, prices are getting lower and lower. Of course, if we consider Mexico, though there's the elections in July, there seems that the energy sector reforms will not be will be sustained. So I think that from an investor perspective, it's threefold. Besides the political stability, macroeconomic stability, and so forth, it's first the equipment itself, the equipment supply. The prices are going lower, like we saw what Ethan was showing us this morning, and so that is one of the factors that why the prices are going lower. Second, from a financing perspective, which is essential in countries like Mexico, you have such a diverse alternatives of financing your project, and as an investor, everybody knocks on your door, which is the contrary than, for example, from Africa or some places in Southeast Asia where really you have to go and find the banks that could help you. So in that case, you have capital markets, that is the huge capital markets. The energy auction, you can have your PPAs in local currency, indexed to dollars. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility to attract the private investors. So this is key. It brings a lot of comfort that, or like, for example, in Brazil, okay, so if I don't finance with BNDES, what's going to happen? I mean, things are changing in Brazil, so this is not the norm anymore. But, and I think the third part, which is very important from an investor perspective, the strategic, what is the strategy of the investor? I mean, Enel is a case apart by how it's funded, how it funds its project, it funds it globally, it funds it in Europe, it's a government entity, and it's done on a corporate basis. But from a strategic perspective, either an investor wants to get into that market and will pay the price from being the outlier to being a potential predominance in the market through continuing bidding. But it could also be a strategy in the terms of really putting this footprint in this market, understanding the market, and seeing also the complementarities that can come into through this energy auction, and from a regional perspective, I would say.
Great, thank you. We'll have Vicki and then Ethan, and then we'll take more hands.
Hi, Vicki Gunderson with the Commerce Department. I had a kind of drawing your panel relative to the previous ones where we heard from suppliers and U.S. manufacturers and service providers. You all are on a different end of the market segment, right? Consulting and financing. How do